right, welcome back, everyone. We are now going to enter our afternoon session. I trust that you've had a good 2-hour break, had a good lunch, not too much. And we are going to dedicate the next 2 periods, which are the 2 periods this afternoon, to finish Revelation 18. We started in our second session this morning, but now the 2 sessions in the afternoon, we're going to study Revelation 18. And then tomorrow morning, we will be going into wedding customs. Because in order to understand Revelation 19, 1 through 10, we need to understand wedding customs from biblical times. So I would encourage you to read that chapter, which is the one right after the one on Revelation 18. And that way you'll have a good picture of the distinction between the wedding and the reception and so on. So let's have a word of prayer. And we'll get into our study. Father in heaven, we thank you. We thank you so much that you give us life and health and strength. You give us your word. You just pour out your boundless blessings upon us. Thank you so much. Thank you not only for all of the things that appear to be good, but we also thank you for the trials because they help build our faith. We ask, Lord, that you will be with us as we study this afternoon, that we might understand the importance of Revelation chapter 18, that we might take it to heart, live in harmony with your will, and preach this unique, special message for this time. This we pray and we plead in the precious and wonderful and holy name of Jesus, our Savior. Amen. We are going to begin on page 122 at the top of the page. We left off basically there in our last session this morning, and we need to cover at least probably 10 or 11 pages so that we're right on target to finish in the second session this afternoon. So we begin at the top of page 122. This entire chapter, chapter 18, is written in the literary style of a lamentation or a funeral dirge. When the Babylonian system collapses, the multitudes will realize that their religious leaders have deceived them, and they will turn on them. The religious leaders encourage them to get rich and to persecute those who keep the Sabbath. And now we have 2 passages in the Bible that describe this particular moment of time. The first is Ezekiel 7, 15 through 19. I wish we had time to deal with the entire context of this passage. I went to Amazing Facts just a few weeks ago, and I preached a sermon titled Sighing and Crying in Jerusalem. And I drew the entire parallel there. But now we want to look just at the aspect that has to do with the wailing there in Revelation chapter 18. It says in Ezekiel 7, verse 15, this is what the rich are going to do. They will throw their silver into the streets, and their gold will be like refuse. Their silver and their gold will not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. Do you notice the wrath of the Lord? That's the same expression that's used in the book of Revelation. They will not satisfy their souls, nor fill their stomachs, because it became their stumbling block of iniquity. As for the beauty of his ornaments, he set it in majesty, but they made it from it images of their abominations, their detestable things. Therefore, I have made it like refuse to them. I will give it as plunder into the hands of strangers, and to the wicked of the earth as spoil, and they shall defile it. So they will cast their silver and their gold into the streets. They're going to say, what's the use of having silver and gold if we're lost? The other passage is in James 5 and verses 1 to 6. And of course, we probably know this passage better than the one in the book of Ezekiel. It says there, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. Now notice what comes next. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out. And the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You have condemned, you have murdered the just. He does not resist you. So notice it's talking about the oppression of the poor and needy by those who have many resources. Both of these passages are pointing to this specific time in history that is described in Revelation chapter 18. So now let's notice the flow of chapter 18. What is the flow of chapter 18? Well, you notice this morning that Revelation 17 verse 18 is the bridge between Revelation 17 and Revelation 18. Notice once again that verse, Revelation 17 verse 18. And the woman whom you saw is the great city. So is the harlot the same as the great city? Yes. So, and the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So chapter 17 and 18 describe the same period of time, but from different perspectives. Now let's take a bird's eye view of the structure of Revelation 18. This is at the top of page 123. Here you have a little outline of the sequence of details in this chapter. Revelation 18, 1 through 5, you have the loud cry to come out of Babylon before the outpouring of the 7 last plagues. Let me ask you, is Revelation chapter 18, verses 1 through 5, does that take place after the close of probation? It can't. What use would it be to call people out of Babylon before the plagues fall if the plagues have already fallen? So this is clearly a parenthetical section that takes us back to probationary time and tells everyone, get out of Babylon before the plagues fall. Don't stay in there because you're going to receive the plagues. So Revelation 18, 1 through 5 is the loud cry to come out of Babylon before the close of probation and the outpouring of the 7 last plagues. Then Revelation 18, verses 6 through 8, describes the retribution upon Babylon for her sins. Then Revelation 18, verses 9 and 10, you have the lament of the kings of the earth when Babylon falls. In Revelation 18, 11 to 16, you have the lament of the capitalists. They're called the great men of the earth. The CEOs, if you please, of the large corporations of the world. And then in Revelation 18, 17 through 19, you have the lament of the employees and the travelers. In Revelation 18, verse 20, you have the song of rejoicing in heaven over Babylon's fall. And that's going to be picked up in chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. It's just a little inkling. It's giving you a taste of chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. And then Revelation 18, 21 to 24, this is interesting. The great city of Babylon is drowned. Remember what we read from Jeremiah 50 and 51? Jeremiah was told, take this stone that represents Babylon and cast it into the depths of the Euphrates River. Well, that's what this is picking up on. Drowning the great city, and as a result, all of the activities in the city come to an end. The cessation of activities everything that characterizes a city. So that is the structure or the outline that we're going to follow as we study along. Now, let's notice the location of verses 1 to 5. I already briefly mentioned this, but let's go through it. Revelation 18, 1 through 5 is a parenthesis between Revelation 17 and Revelation 18, 6 to 24. As we have seen, Revelation 17 portrays the final global apostasy of Babylon and her doom. Revelation 18, 6 through 19 then describes the same period, but from a different perspective. In between these two places, Babylon and what Babylon does and the condemnation of Babylon, in between these two pictures, complementary pictures, each with their own emphasis, you have Revelation chapter 18, verses 1 to 5. And that is after chapter 17, the angel says, this is coming to Babylon, get out. And then the rest of chapter 18 says, if you don't get out, this is what you're going to be singing. In contrast to Revelation 19, 1 through 10, which is a song of rejoicing and happiness of those who are victorious over the beast, his image, and his mark. It is rather obvious that this warning must be given shortly before the close of probation and the outpouring of the 7 last plagues. Clearly, verse 5 indicates that when the warning is given, the plagues have not yet fallen. We'll see that in a few moments. Here is the scenario. This is a summary of the scenario. Revelation 17 describes the sins and condemnation of Babylon. Revelation 18, 1 through 5 calls God's people to come out of Babylon before divine condemnation falls upon her. And Revelation 18, 6 through 24 picks up on what is in chapter 17 and gives us the lamentation of those who fail to respond to the call. Will anyone have an excuse when they're caught in the time of trouble without any shelter? No, because God tells us in Revelation 17 that the whole world is going to come together. The harlot, the daughters, the kings, the waters of the multitudes of the world, there will be this world confederacy. Everyone on the same page from the devil's side. And God will have a small remnant in every place of the world, symbolically represented as being on Mount Zion or in Israel. Not literally, but spiritually. And so the angel of Revelation chapter 18 and verses 1 through 5 that proclaims the loud cry, and then the voice of Jesus that says, "Come out of her, my people," is telling people, hey, don't stay there. Because it might appear that the whole world is the winner and that this little remnant is going to lose. Don't believe it. Because ultimately the remnant is going to win because the King of Kings is on their side. Get out while you can. Is this a message that the world needs to hear? Yes. Would you want people to stay in Babylon? No. Well, they're going to stay there unless they know what it is. And who's going to tell them? We are the ones that are going to have to tell them. Secrets unsealed. Some TV, yes. But each of us have to speak to the people that we know to share these things with them. So let's read Revelation 18 and verses 1 through 5. This is something that's happening before the close of probation. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. This is speaking about a moral fall, by the way, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. Well, that's quite a description, isn't it? Verse 3, for all the nations have drunk of the wine. What is the wine? Her false doctrines have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And now there's a new element that we didn't find before. And the merchants of the earth. Is the worldwide economy, the merchants, are they involved in this final Babylonian system? Yes, they finance it. And so it says, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And then, this is the voice of Jesus. The loud cry is the loud cry of an angel, but verse 4 is the loud cry of Jesus. You say, how do we know that? Because it says, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her. Would an angel say, come out of her, my people? No, this is Jesus. Come out of her, my people. Why do they need to come out? Lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive her plagues. Have the plagues fallen yet at this point? No, the warning is being given, get out so that you don't receive the plagues. So this is during probationary time. And then it says in verse 4, that means because her sins have reached to heaven and God has remembered her iniquities. So Revelation chapter 18 verses 1 through 5 is describing what Adventists call the latter rain and the loud cry. Now let's go to the next section. There's a close link. This is a very important point. There's a close link between the second angel's message in Revelation 14 verse 8 and the loud cry message of this angel in Revelation chapter 18 verses 1 through 5. Let's go back to Revelation 14, the second angel's message. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 8. It says here, and another angel followed, in other words, followed the first, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So the second angel's message has the same basic elements as the loud cry of Revelation 18, but we're going to find that the loud cry is far more intensive with a much louder voice. Now, the Millerites proclaimed the message of Revelation 14 verse 8. Did the Millerites proclaim that Babylon had fallen? Did multitudes come out of the apostate churches leading up to 1844? Yes, they came out from the Methodists, from the Baptists. Ellen White and her family were disfellowshipped from the Methodist Church. In other words, multitudes came out. When they preached the first angel's message and it was rejected, well, then they gave the second angel's message and people came out of those apostate religious organizations. But now notice, shortly before the close of probation, the second angel's message will be proclaimed once more. That's Revelation 18. But with global extension, because the first time it was basically in the east of the United States. The Millerites, it was proclaimed, that in general terms, it was proclaimed, Joseph Wolfe and others across the world that Jesus was coming soon. The signs indicated it. But the second angel's message as such was preached mostly in New England. It was more of a local type thing. But when this message is proclaimed once more, it will be of global extension with far greater power. Ellen White explained the relationship between Revelation 14:8, which is the second angel's message, and the loud cry of Revelation 18. Notice this statement that she makes. It's long, but it is loaded with valuable information. This is the bottom of page 124. When Jesus began his public ministry, he cleansed the temple from its sacrilegious profanation. Among the last acts of his ministry was the second cleansing of the temple. Now let me stop there just for a moment and explain what the two cleansings of the temple mean, according to the spirit of prophecy. The first cleansing of the sanctuary in the fulfillment began in 1844. It is cleansing the sanctuary from the sins of those who died. The loud cry will be an announcement that Jesus is about to cleanse the sanctuary from the sins of the living saints. So there will be a cleansing of the sanctuary at the end, which will be the cleansing of the sins of the living, like in 1844 began the cleansing of the sins of those who died in the Lord. Now let's continue the statement. So, in the last work for warning of the world, two distinct calls are made to the churches. The second angel's message is, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. That's the first fulfillment. And then, And in the loud cry of the third angel's message, a voice is heard from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. That's Review and Herald, December 6, 1892. In another statement that we find in Great Controversy 603 and 604, which is in the chapter, The Final Warning, she writes the following. This scripture, Revelation 18, 1-5, points forward to a time when the announcement of the fall of Babylon, as made by the second angel of Revelation 14, is to be what? Repeated with additional mention of the corruptions which have been entering the various organizations that constitute Babylon since that message was first given in the summer of 1844. Has the Christian world become much more iniquitous than it was leading up to 1844? Yeah, because the mainline churches are accepting gay marriage and gay clergy, etc. I mean, the church, there are scholars of the churches that are saying that the world came into existence by macroevolution. That didn't happen in 1844. There's additional corruptions that have come into the Christian church. Is this message in 1844 about the fall of Babylon going to be given again on a global scale, denouncing the additional sins that have entered Babylon? Absolutely. She continues. A terrible condition of the religious world is here described. With every rejection of the truth, the minds of the people will become darker, their hearts more stubborn, until they are entrenched in an infidel hardihood. The word hardihood means resolute and self-assured audacity. In defiance of the warnings that God has given, they will continue to trample upon one of the precepts of the Decalogue until they are led to persecute those who hold it sacred. That hasn't come yet, but it's coming down the road. Christ is set at naught in the contempt placed upon His word and His people. As the churches accept the teachings of spiritualism, the restraint imposed upon the carnal heart is removed, and the profession of religion will become a cloak to conceal the basest iniquity. A belief in spiritual manifestations, that means spiritualism, by the way, opens the door to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, and thus the influence of evil angels will be felt in the churches. That's what we have to face in proclaiming this message that we've been studying here. So to speak, the loud cry is the second angel's message on steroids. Now, maybe that's not the way we should express it, but you understand the expression, right? Notice the following comparison between the second angel's message in Revelation 14, verse 8, and the loud cry in Revelation 18, 1-4. Notice this chart. In Revelation 14, verse 8, an angel proclaims the message. Oh, in chapter 18, it is what? A mighty angel that proclaims the message. In Revelation 14, verse 8, there's no mention of a loud voice. Oh, but in chapter 18, the angel cries mightily with a loud voice. You know, a loud voice is already mighty, but it wants to underline mightily with a loud voice. That's why it's a loud cry, folks. Why did Babylon fall in Revelation 14, verse 8? She made all nations drink. And in Revelation chapter 18, she fell because she gave wine to the nations. Those are parallel. In Revelation 14:8, there's no call to come out of Babylon. In Revelation 18, there's a call to come out before the falling of the plagues. In Revelation 14:8, there's no mention of demons in Babylon. But in Revelation chapter 18, Babylon is the habitation of demons. In Revelation 14:8, there's no mention of kings and merchants. In Revelation chapter 18, you have the mention of kings and merchants. In Revelation 14:8, there's no mention of sins being piled up to heaven. That means that the cup is full. But in Revelation 18, it says, her sins have filled the cup. And in Revelation 14, verse 8, there's no mention of God's punishment on Babylon, but in Revelation 18, God mentions what the punishment will be upon Babylon. Is Revelation 18 an intensification of the second angel's message? Yes, because of all these characteristics that the text itself gives us. So these verses are speaking about a great revival among God's people, a powerful revival, through the power that falls, the latter rain power. And when the latter rain power falls, God's people will get down to business and they will proclaim this loud cry. Do you think Satan knows that this event is around the corner and it's going to take place? Do you think the devil knows that there's going to be a great revival among God's people? Of course he does. So what is he going to do? Before it comes, he's going to introduce a counterfeit. You know, usually the counterfeit comes after the genuine. Usually, not always. You know, the Bible says that the Sabbath is God's original day of rest. It's the genuine. And the devil, of course, later on, he introduces a counterfeit, Sunday. But in this case, Satan is going to try and preempt the true revival by introducing a false one. And I believe that we're seeing that in the churches today. Not only in the churches outside our church, but inside our own denomination. If you don't believe it, read the book, Worship at Satan's Throne, that I wrote. That is a chilling description of what is happening within the own remnant church. This is still God's remnant church. I want to make that clear. This is still God's church with all sorts of problems in it. And the shaking, of course, is going to take care of those problems. And the shaking doesn't mean that, the good people leave and the bad people stay. Actually, it's all of the people who are not committed to Christ will eventually leave. And then God will have, like in the days of Gideon, he'll have his 300. Amen. Now, by the way, the story of Gideon, I have a sermon, that's a typological story. You know, it points forward to this time. So let's read about the counterfeit and the genuine. According to Revelation 13, verse 13, and the spirit of prophecy, there will be a great counterfeit revival just before the outpouring of the latter rain and the loud cry. This is a long passage, but it is loaded with valuable information. Ellen White wrote in Great Controversy 390, notwithstanding the spiritual darkness and alienation from God that exist in the churches that constitute Babylon, now notice what Ellen White says, the great body of Christ's true followers is still to be found in their communion. Most of God's true children are outside the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That's what she's saying. She continues, there are many of these who have never seen the special truths for this time. What does it mean? What does she mean when she says the special truths for this time? What do we call that? Present truth. Exactly. She continues, not a few are dissatisfied with their present condition and are longing for clearer light. They look in vain for the image of Christ in the churches with which they are connected. As these bodies depart further and further from the truth and ally themselves more closely with the world, the difference between the two classes will widen and it will finally result in separation. The time will come when those who love God supremely can no longer remain in connection with such as are lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. Revelation 18 points to the time when, as a result of rejecting the threefold warning of Revelation 14, 6 through 12, the church will have. Had the church reached this in 1844 yet? No, not yet, not yet. But here, yes, by rejecting the warning, the church will have fully reached the condition foretold by the second angel. That is, Babylon is fallen. And the people of God still in Babylon will be called upon to separate from her communion. This message is the last that will ever be given to the world. So you want to know what the last message for the world is? Revelation 18, 1 to 5. There'll be no messages for the world after that. She continues, this message is the last that will ever be given to the world, and it will accomplish its work when those that believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness, shall be left to receive strong delusion and to believe a lie. Then the light of truth will shine upon all whose hearts are open to receive it, and all the children of the Lord that remain in Babylon will heed the call, come out of her, my people. Isn't that a beautiful portrait? Praise the Lord. You know, she says that multitudes will leave the remnant church, but their places will be taken. There will be no vacancies left. Multitudes will come into the church. Now, Satan knows that this is going to happen. How does he know? By reading Revelation 18. You think the devil, don't think the devil reads Bible prophecy? Are you kidding me? He reads Bible prophecy, and then he tells people, he gives people a false concept of Bible prophecy. He says, I got them fooled. Notice how Ellen White describes this apostasy, this false revival. Notwithstanding the widespread declension of faith and piety, there are true followers of Christ in these churches. Before the visitation of God's judgments upon the earth, that's before the close of probation, there will be among the people of the Lord such a revival of primitive godliness as has not been witnessed since apostolic times. Are we longing for those days? Amen. The Spirit and power of God will be poured out upon His children. At that time, many will separate themselves from those churches in which the love of this world has supplanted love for God and His Word. Many, both of ministers and people, will gladly accept those great truths which God has caused to be proclaimed at this time to prepare a people for the Lord's second coming. Now here comes Satan's role. The enemy of souls desires to hinder this work. And before the time for such a movement shall come, in other words, before the genuine revival and the loud cry, he will endeavor to prevent it by introducing what? A counterfeit. In those churches which he can bring under his deceptive power, he will make it appear that God's special blessing is poured out. There will be manifest what is thought to be great religious interest. Multitudes will exult that God is working marvelously for them when the work is that of another spirit. Under a religious guise. What is a guise? It's a disguise, right? Under a religious guise, Satan will seek to extend his influence over where? Over the Christian world. And you remember we talked about fire falling from heaven. I believe this is the time when fire, literal fire, will fall from heaven. And they'll use that to say this is a new Pentecost. You know, the Holy Spirit is being poured out just like on the day of Pentecost where they saw tongues of fire. Fire is falling from heaven. This proves that our movement is genuine. Our movement is true. And so at the bottom of page 127 is the statement I read before in the Q&A. Satan will work through his agents who have departed from the faith to bring fire down from heaven in the sight of men. Now I'm going to skip the next page because I included that in the Q&A session. Let's go to page 129 and we'll begin there where it says verse by verse study of Revelation chapter 18. So let's go to the comments on verse 1. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. Now there's several things that we need to say about this verse. First of all, the word power here, it's translated power, it's really great authority. You see, in Greek there are two words that the King James Version translates power. The word dunamis, where we get the word dynamite from, and the word exousia, which means authority. Like Jesus says, all authority has been given to me in heaven and in earth. The word here is that this angel descends from heaven having great authority. And the word great is mega. So you could say mega authority. This is the loud cry of the third angel, also known as the fourth angel. In the darkest period of history, God will reveal the greatest light of history. And that light is the truth about God's glorious character of love as revealed in His law. Notice what we find in the next quotation. The three angels' messages are to be combined, giving their threefold light to the world. In the Revelation, John says, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. This represents the giving of the last and threefold message of warning to the world. So the loud cry is not simply a repetition of the second angel's message. The loud cry is putting jumper cables on all three messages. But of course, the part that has to do with the second angel's message is, with the power of the message, the invitation is given for people to what? To get out, to come out. Notice what we find in the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 7, page 983. Once again, this is an Ellen White statement. The prophecies in the 18th of Revelation will soon be fulfilled. During the proclamation of the third angel's message, another angel is to come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth is to be lightened with his glory. The Spirit of the Lord will so graciously bless consecrated human instrumentalities that men, women, and children will open their lips in praise and thanksgiving, filling the earth with the knowledge of God and with unsurpassed glory as the waters cover the sea. You remember when Moses was at the top of Mount Sinai and he had communion with the Lord? What happened when he came down from the mount? His face was glowing. His face was shining. What was the glory on his face? The glory in his face was the glory that rubbed off from the Lord, because he had communion with the Lord. And the same is going to happen with God's people. In fact, Ellen White describes in the chapter, The Final Warning, she says that God's servants with faces lighted up will go everywhere on the earth to share the loud cry message, because they want to see people saved. They're going to show that there's no conflict between the law of God and the love of God. There is actually harmony in between the law and love. You know, the Christian world these days wants to talk about love without the law. And you can't do that, because the law is a law of love. It describes perfect interpersonal relationships. If you love your parents, you're going to respect them. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to kill him. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to go to bed with his wife. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to steal what belongs to your neighbor. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to ruin his or her reputation. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to covet what belongs to them. If you love the Lord, you're not going to have other gods. If you love the Lord, you're not going to make idols that degrade your concept of God by creating God in man's image. That's what an image is. It's creating God in man's image. If you love God, you're going to respect His name. If you love God, you're going to want to spend 24 hours with Jesus on Sabbath. So the law is not restrictive. The law is not a yoke of bondage like the Christian world many times teaches. The law is a law of love. It protects our relationship with God and our relationship with our fellow human beings. In Christ's Object Lessons, page 415, Ellen White wrote, "The last rays of merciful light, the last message of mercy to be given to the world, is a revelation of His character of love. The children of God are to manifest His glory. In their own life and character, they are to reveal what the grace of God has done for them." And probably some of you have heard this illustration. Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." But He also said, You are the light of the world. Now, wait a minute. Who's the light of the world? Is it Jesus or is it his people? He was speaking to his disciples. There appears to be a contradiction. There's no contradiction. You go out some night, clear night in Fresno, you see that full, beautiful, silver moon in the sky. You look and somebody's with you, you say, isn't that a beautiful moon out there tonight? Look at how bright it is. And so you're extolling the moon. You're glorifying the moon. But what you really need to say is, isn't the sun beautiful tonight? Because the moon has no light. It receives from the sun and then it gives to the earth. Jesus is the light of the world. He is the sun. We are moons. And if we're not reflecting the light, it's because we have no connection with the light. Are you following the illustration? That's what this is saying. We will revere the character of love. And how do we form that character? How do we get that character? How did Moses have the glory in his face? He had communion with the Lord. He had an intimate face-to-face relationship with the Lord. Notice this beautiful statement in the devotional book by Ellen White, Sons and Daughters of God. By beholding Christ, by talking of Him, by beholding the loveliness of His character, we become changed. How do we become changed? By beholding Christ. Where do we behold Him? Some mystical experience, yoga. No, people think that fellowship with Christ means some mystical connection with Him. We gain a picture of Christ from this book, from the Bible, by meditating on Scripture in a tranquil place, a quiet place. We read a passage from Scripture and then we allow our mind to expand upon it. And we are changed into the same image. You know, I had a student in Columbia. He was the best student that I ever had. He would come to class. He was the first one in class. And he would take out his notebook. He would take out his Bible. He had his pen in hand. From the time that the class started till the class ended, he had his eyes glued on the instructor. 3 years I had him as a student in all the classes that I taught. And so several years later, I was preaching in a certain location, and a woman came up to me after I preached my sermon, and she says, do you know Pastor so-and-so? By the way, he teaches at Southwestern Adventist University now, this student. Says, do you know this individual? I said, oh yeah, I know him well. And she looked at me, she says, you preach just like him. And so, after that, we invited him to our studio to do a series. And, there was no audience there, so I decided I would sit at the feet of my student and watch him preach. And it was like I was watching myself. Why? Because by beholding, we are what? By beholding, we are changed. That's a psychological principle. It's a law of life, that we are changed into the image of what we see. That's the reason why the world is so violent, because people are feeding themselves movies and television and even the news, everything is bad. Everything is shootings and this and that and the other. And we reflect what we watch and what we listen to. And so Ellen White says, by beholding Christ, by talking of Him, by beholding the loveliness of His character, we become changed. Changed from glory to glory. In other words, the more we behold, the more we're changed. And what is glory, asks Ellen White? Character. And he becomes changed from character to character. Thus we see that there is a work of purification that goes on by beholding Jesus. And so when we spend time with Jesus, the world will see it. They'll say, this person is different. But not because the person is different, but because Jesus transformed and changed the person into His image. Now let's go to verse 2. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become the dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. Is that quite a contrast between that and the world is filled with God's glory? It's a stark contrast. Now, verse 2 contains 3 parallel expressions. They mean the same thing, but in different words. A dwelling place of what? Of demons. Another way of saying it is a prison for every foul spirit. And in case you missed what dwelling place of demons and prison for every foul spirit means, it is a cage for every unclean and hated bird. And we'll come back to the birds in just a few moments on the next page. The twofold repetition of the expression is fallen doesn't say Babylon is fallen. It says Babylon is fallen, is fallen. It means that Babylon is really fallen. Because when the Bible repeats something, it's because God wants to confirm it and make it sure, like in the 2 dreams that God gave Pharaoh. You remember the 2 dreams? And basically they meant the same thing, but they were expressed in different terminology. In Hebrew poetry, this is what is called synonymous parallelism. At this point, just before the close of probation, Babylon will have experienced an irreversible moral fall that is beyond repair. She will have been totally possessed by forces of evil. In other words, there's no longer any remedy. She's totally filled with cancer from top to bottom. Revelation 18 verse 2 is a confirmation of Revelation 16 and verse 13, where the text describes a Babylonian trilogy speaking with the authority of what? Remember the 3 evil spirits like frogs that come out of the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet? That's pointing to the time when the threefold union is totally dominated by wicked, evil forces in the invisible world. And of course, these demons are gathering everyone in the world that will allow it onto the side of Satan. Well, while God, through the 3 angels' message, is gathering His faithful people on His side. And so the question is, which side do you want to be on? I would hope that it will be God's side. You know, the beast will say, hey, I'll let you live if you receive the mark of the beast. And to a certain point, that's true. You know, you won't be killed. But God says, if you're killed, I'll resurrect you. And you will live forever. Well, what kind of choice is that? I choose the second, of course. Now, let's go to the top of the page. Ellen White describes there will be a universal bond of union, one great harmony, a confederacy of Satan's forces. Is she also using synonymous parallelism? She most certainly is. The hateful birds here are not sparrows. They are birds of prey. This is the same as saying that the multitudes and the kings are going to eat up the religious powers. The birds are symbolic. This is clearly indicated in Revelation 19, verse 17, where the same Greek word refers to the fowl of the air, not the birds that are in the trees, the fowl of the air. Like for example, California condors. What are they? They are scavengers, and they prey upon those who deceived them. The word cage is translated prison elsewhere in the New Testament. So really, when it says cage for every bird, it's because birds are in cages, but really the word is prison in the Greek language. Ellen White described the condition of the religious world during this period. And I read this before, a terrible condition of the religious world is here described. With every rejection of truth, the minds of the people will become darker, their hearts more stubborn, until they are entrenched in infidel hardihood. In defiance of the warnings which God has given, they will continue to trample upon one of the precepts of the Decalogue. And of course, he who violates one violates them all, until they are led to persecute those who hold it sacred. Ellen White also describes in the next quotation this particular period. This one is found in Review and Herald, December 13, 1892. After the truth has been proclaimed as a witness to all nations, every conceivable power of evil will be set in operation. And the minds will be confused by many voices saying, Lo, here is Christ. Lo, he is there. This is the truth. I have a message from God. He has sent me with great light, is what they're going to say. Then there will be a removing of the landmarks. Who would that be, removing the landmarks? Listen, you can't remove what wasn't set up before. What are the landmarks? Seventh-day Adventists have the landmarks, right? Ellen White constantly uses the word to refer to the truths, the distinctive truths that the Seventh-day Adventist Church holds. And so she's saying there will be a removing of the landmarks and an attempt to tear down the pillars of our faith. In another place in Great Controversy, she says that great individuals, intellectuals in the church, will forsake the church and they will become the greatest enemies of God's faithful people. She continues, a more decided effort will be made to exalt the false Sabbath and to cast contempt upon God himself by supplanting the day he has blessed and sanctified. This false Sabbath is to be enforced by an oppressive law. Satan and his angels are wide awake and intensely active, working with energy and perseverance through human instrumentalities to bring about his purpose of obliterating from the minds of men the knowledge of God. But here's the good news. But while Satan works with his lying wonders, the time will be fulfilled, foretold in the Revelation, and the mighty angel that shall lighten the earth with his glory will proclaim the fall of Babylon and call upon God's people to forsake her. Now, what will the messengers be like, the ones that are going to proclaim the loud cry? Ellen White says that God will use few great men. Notice this stirring statement in Great Controversy 606 and 607. As the time comes for it to be given with the greatest power, this is the loud cry, the Lord will work through what? Humble instruments, leading the minds of those who consecrate themselves to his service. The laborers will be qualified rather by the unction of his Spirit than by the training of literary institutions. It's not going to be the formal education. It's going to be the education given by the Holy Spirit. Men of faith and prayer will be constrained to go forth with holy zeal, declaring the words that God gives them. The sins of Babylon will be laid open. The fearful results of enforcing the observances of the church by civil authority, the inroads of spiritualism, the stealthy but rapid progress of the papal power, all will be unmasked. By these solemn stirrings, the people will be warnings, the people will be stirred. Thousands upon thousands will listen who have never heard words like these. In amazement, they hear the testimony that Babylon is the church, fallen because of her errors and sins, because of her rejection of the truth sent to her from heaven. As the people go to their former teachers, this is the people in Babylon, go to their former teachers with the eager inquiry, are these things so? The ministers present fables, prophesy smooth things, to soothe their fears and quiet the awakened conscience. But since many refuse to be satisfied with the mere authority of men and demand a plain, thus saith the Lord, the popular ministry, like the Pharisees of old, filled with anger as their authority is questioned, will denounce the message as of Satan. That's the unpardonable sin, right? He who attributes the work of God to the devil, that's the unpardonable sin. So once again, the popular ministry, like the Pharisees of old, filled with anger as their authority is questioned, will denounce the message as of Satan and stir up the sin-loving multitudes to revile and persecute those who proclaim it. All of this is what we have to look forward to. But won't it be a privilege to live during this time? You know, I hear some Adventists say, wow, the trial ahead, that's really rough. It's going to be really difficult. I certainly hope the Lord lays me to rest before then. But can you imagine what a privilege it's going to be, folks, for us to proclaim God's message in the midst of the greatest opposition in the history of the world, preach the most powerful message that has ever been preached in history. Let us not ask the Lord to lay us to rest before that time. Let us ask the Lord to empower us to proclaim the message at that time if we are alive, because it'll be a glorious privilege. Imagine the multitudes of people that will come out of Babylon and be saved in the kingdom as a result of the message. It's going to be a fantastic time to live. And I believe that as we look at everything that's happening in the world, this is going to take place very soon. So let's do verse 3, and then we will take our Q&A session. Verse 3 says, "For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury." That is Babylon's luxury. The word merchants in verse 3 literally means one who is on a journey. In Greek, it means one who is on a journey. You say, now, what does that have to do with merchants? Well, let's notice. The concept comes from Ezekiel 27. In fact, Ezekiel 27 is in the background of Revelation chapter 18, where the merchants of Tyre, which is a city on the edge of the Mediterranean, where Lebanon is today, traveled in ships to sell their wares. We must link the merchants of Babylon, this is an important point, with Revelation 13 verse 15, where we are told that Babylon forbade God's faithful people to buy and sell. So is Babylon going to be in control of the world commerce? Yes, they're going to forbid to buy and sell. Is it going to cost them dearly? Yes, because then they're not going to be able to sell their stuff. That's, in other words, they receive the same punishment that they meted out on God's people. God's faithful people will not be able to buy or sell unless they worship the image of the beast. They will not. But God will still sustain them by giving them food and by giving them water. Amen. The same is not going to happen with Babylon. Babylon will not be able to sell her wares. Commerce will come to an end. At the end of verse 3, the word that is translated luxury is actually dunamis, which should be translated power. In other words, the power of Babylon resided in her what? In her economic clout. Now she is going to lose her power because she will no longer be able to sell her merchandise. So chapter 18 is adding a picture to this tumultuous period in history where God will intervene.